Another question here. Nevo, can you please talk about nested loops? Okay. Nested loops is not a term that Erickson used. It comes from the field of NLP, but describes something that Erickson did. And it's about metaphors. Nested loops is about metaphors and stories. Now, it's a bit like juggling in a way, because you're working with several stories, not just one, and you have to have the experience of being able to create stories that are relevant to evoking the responses in your client that will move them towards a certain direction and the resolution of their problem. So it does require some previous experience, but you can start by understanding the concept behind nested loops. Each loop is like a story. You think of a story as a beginning, a middle, and end, and then you can go back to the beginning again. Like, think of it as a loop like that. You could loop around to it. So nested loops are kind of stories within stories. So take the concept of a huge loop, which is metaphor, part of the session, which is metaphoric. That's one big loop. But inside that, you're going to create mini loops. Each one is going to be a story. Okay. Now, there are two ways you can do this. One way is to tell a story that has one main message that's delivered to the unconscious mind. That is, the story is entertaining enough that it keeps the focus of the conscious mind on the story itself, whilst at a different level, there's a meaning and implication in the story that appeals to the unconscious. Okay. Think of that. Okay. And that each metaphor or each loop, each story has to have the same format, in that it has a conscious interest, but also an unconscious meaning or message to the unconscious to lead them in a direction. So that message can be the same in every story if you're going for one particular outcome, or it can be a different message in each story if you need a series of behaviors or emotions to be evoked in order to get that person to move in a certain direction. So two ways you can do this, as I said. One is you complete the story, then go on to the next story, then you complete the story, go on to the next story, complete the story, go on to the next story. So here they're nested within the concept of one big loop. The alternative is you actually embed each loop inside of the other. So you tell one story, you go through the phase where the meaning is delivered to the unconscious, just enough, and then you go to the next story, like you're going off at a tangent. Oh, that reminds me about something else. You're going off at a tangent, and you tell the next story, and the same thing happens. You don't complete it fully, but you have the messages delivered, but they haven't been pulled together yet. So imagine one story has a message to evoke a certain feeling or emotion or motivation or insight or whatever, or change in behavior. The next story, again, either the same or a different motivation, emotion, or whatever's necessary to get this person to move in that direction. And then you go on to another story. So you never finish each story as you give them. Let's say you give 3 or 4 stories. Okay. The client just hears 3 or 4 completely different stories. They're only related in terms of the segue, the link. Oh, that reminds me. And then what you're segueing, what you're saying reminds you of, you're reminding of the meaning. For the client's conscious mind, it's a completely different story and seemingly unrelated at the conscious level. So how does the client make sense of this? Well, they can't consciously. So the unconscious has to make sense of it. Why give me this whole list of different stories when they're not related? Well, the unconscious mind has to find the similarities. What is it between the different stories? And that it identifies the similarities in the meanings, in the suggestions within each story. And then at the end, you can tie it all together. You can actually have a story that kind of finishes up the actual story itself and pulls all of those threads of meaning together. Okay, and then you can be out of that. You can carry on with doing other therapy, or if you want to create an amnesia for that, you can just go back and finish each of those stories in reverse. And what that does is embeds amnesia for the previous story, till you get back to the first story. So it is quite complex, but it's well worth learning. But as you can see, you need to be able to create stories that not only just stories, but interesting stories that keep the attention. Secondly, they have to have some emotive content, so you actually have a feeling or some kind of momentum or motivation within each story. Thirdly, you have to create the meaning that you want the client to accept at an unconscious level. And lastly, it has to be relevant to resolving the problem. So quite a lot of balls in the air when you're doing your juggling there, but it's well worth taking time to learn how to do that. Okay, Nevo, I hope that's helped you.